Ken's speech is entitled Taming the Monster. Our country is facing a fiscal crisis. The ever-growing federal government is on autopilot because of a law passed in 1974, the Baseline Budget Act. Here to explain what it is, why it is a problem, and how to stop the exponential growth of this monster, please help me welcome Mr. Ken Smith with his speech, Taming the Monster. Taming the Monster, Ken Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, especially those who applauded me. I propose that we repeal the Baseline Budget Act of 1974. During this talk, I will explain what it is, why we need to repeal it, and I will go through a whole bunch of charts fairly quickly, but I can give you the link afterwards to study them, that explain how our government is currently totally out of control with spending and why. First, let's talk about budgeting in general. Now, when you and I budget something, let's say our household budget, we sit down maybe at the kitchen table with our spouse and we go over how much we earned last year, how much we expect to earn this next year, what we spent last year, and what we can afford to spend this next year. Sound familiar? No nods. No one but me budgets. Oh, okay. It's my wife budgets. We do not say, oh, we spent X amount last year, so we will spend 10% more this year, whether the money's there or not. That tends to cause a tremendous amount of credit card debt, which maybe many people did do in their household budgets in the past. Let's say that Arlinda and I had actually sat down and decided on our budget, and then a month later she sees a sale on a dress and shoes she's really got to have. It's a $500 dress and $200 shoe, and it's not in our budget. But she goes out and she buys the dress and then decides not to buy the shoes. So she comes back and tells me how much she cut our budget, $200. Well, this is how the federal government works. When you hear about drastic or draconian cuts to the budget, it isn't a cut to the budget as you and I understand the word budget. It is instead a cut in the pre-programmed growth of the budget. Different departments have different numbers, generally ranging from 3 to 10% growth automatically. And then the Baseline Budget Act said that the Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, is supposed to take those numbers and plug that in as the budget, and then when Congress comes up with a budget, they can call everything that they didn't grow the government by a cut. And this is why you always hear that people are cutting the budget, they're cutting education, they're cutting whatever. They're not. They're cutting the growth of it. They're not allowing it to grow at the automatic rate. But for the past few years, since no budget was passed, we have been growing at that automatic rate. That's what the continuing resolutions are making happen. So this is a talk on taming that monster. How the federal government automatically grows exponentially and how we can stop it. First, we'll talk about baseline or federal spending. The first chart here, and all these charts are on inflation-adjusted dollars for accurate representation. This is how much every household in America owes on the federal budget. In 1965, it was $11,000, again adjusted for inflation, $11,903. And it is actually $31,542 last year. These are 2009 figures. It's dropped just a bit to 30,000 because of the recession. People are actually taking home less and they're paying a little less in taxes. But it is projected to go back up, and in 2022, it'll be $34,602 that every household owes for the federal budget. Federal spending actually exceeds the federal revenue by more than $1 trillion now. We take in about $2.5 trillion, we spend $3.5 trillion. So the example of Arlinda not buying the shoes, but buying the dress beyond the budget, illustrates how we got to this point. The federal spending actually grew 12 times faster than the median income. So the burden on the American people is getting worse and worse and worse every year because our income is not going up proportionally. Let's say a typical family spends like the federal government. It would spend $73,319, which is equivalent to the government spending $3.6 trillion, which would have with it a one-year deficit of $21,959, even though it only had $51,360. And the deficit and borrowing to pay for it would be part of its growing family debt of $325,781. Now this is the total debt. So deficit and debt are two different things. Deficit is how much more we spend in a year than we take in. Debt is all of those deficits added together. Mandatory spending has increased nearly 6 times faster than discretionary spending. Discretionary spending, as you can surmise, means things we have discretion over. Mandatory spending are programs like Social Security, Medicare, and interest. No, let's not. We'll do it later. We'll talk about that interest in a little bit. Runaway spending, not inadequate tax revenue, is responsible for future deficits. And it is that Baseline Budget Act that is causing all that. Medicare and other entitlements are now crowding out defense spending dramatically. We're down, and this is based on the gross domestic product comparison. In 1965, we spent 2.5% of the gross domestic product on social programs and 7.4% on defense. We're now spending 4.5% of the GDP on defense, while we spend 9.7% on the non-discretionary. And under Obama's budget, it would drop down to 2.5%, way back to those 1965 levels, the defense budget. Let's talk about the money the federal income receives now. Taxes per household have risen, as we indicated earlier. Per household in 1965, again, these are inflation-adjusted dollars, paid $11,554 to the federal government, and it's $19,409 in 2011. Again, inflation-adjusted dollars. That means that we are paying almost double now what we would have been paying had inflation not happened way back then. 10% of earners pay 71% of the federal income taxes. Looking at it from this chart, you can see the dark blue up there is 1% of the population is paying about 20% of the federal debt. Looking at it this way, I'm sorry, the previous one was the share of adjusted gross income earned is about 20%, but the actual taxes paid are almost 20%, or almost 40%, I'm sorry, just for that 1%. The federal revenues by source, Individual taxes pay for 47.4%. Social insurance or payroll taxes pay for 35.6%. And then corporate taxes, just under 8%, etc. So income tax is the lion's share. Corporate rates are, we are now, this year, the highest in the world for paying corporate income taxes. Quickly, Obamacare has a whole bunch of new taxes added to it. The reason I bring that up is not political, it's just to point out that every program grows every year by law, unless Congress will do something about it. The budget hikes, and by the way, Obama did present a budget. It was voted down. 100% of people in the House and 100% of the people in the Senate voted it down. But that's where we are in that. Let's just quickly end this. We're out of time for that. But I want to talk very quickly about the why we need to repeal this act. I think I've demonstrated part of it. This was a conspiracy from the beginning. It was passed in 1974 under President Nixon when he was being barraged by Watergate, but it was done in collusion with the banking system. The banking system took control of our government in 1913 under the Federal Reserve System Act that was passed then. And the Federal Reserve System was a conspiracy of bankers who got together with Senator Nelson Albright, who was head of the Senate Banking Committee at the time. And they gathered on Jekyll Island off North Carolina, and they went there in disguises, because if anyone saw that group, specific group of people, all the main bankers of our country and the head of the banking committee getting together, they would know something was going on. So this was a conspiracy, literally. And they got together and decided on this system where the banks could put themselves in a position where they can loan money to the federal government without end and earn the interest off of that. And that's how banks earn their money, interest from loaning. And so as long as the federal government knew we can spend all the money we want because the banks can now loan us everything we want, then we can grow. And government is power. That's all it is power. And we can, just continue to accumulate. And someone else has to pay the bill, obviously, and not the members of the Senate. I understand. I'm way over time. not the members of Congress or the President, but we, the American people, have to pay the bill. But one more point, they built into that the concept of bailouts. If you're too big to fail, and of course this group of bankers and their individual banks are all going to be too big to fail. So no matter what they do, we have to bail them out. So the very first step here, in a whole bunch of things that have to be done to reverse all that, though, is to stop this monster from growing automatically. Now, we can't stop Congress from voting in bigger budgets, but at least they should start at zero and justify every department how much money they get, not just automatically grow every one of them. Time for questions and answers. Let's see if I can keep that part of it in time. Yes.
I'm interested in your concept that the bankers conspire to take control of our governments. It's very interesting. So could you elaborate some more? Is there any way, if that's any truth to your allegation here, what can we do to take control back?
Repeal the Federal Reserve Act as well.
Right.
There are a number of proposals of doing a precious metals standard, gold and silver, alongside the Federal Reserve System, where banks, independent of the Federal Reserve, can make loans based on gold and silver on deposit. And the hope is, and in all probability would be, that more people would trust those dollars because they don't inflate. They can only give you money based on their reserves, not just based on their ability to print more, or even virtually print it, just adding zeros on an account. So more people would trust those, and eventually the values would be very different between the two, and people would stop using the Federal Reserve. And then we could eliminate that. But we can't just overnight cancel everything. Any other questions? Yes?
Are there any examples around the world of other countries that have a better banking system that we could learn from, that you're aware of?
I'm not aware of it. Well, again, government is power, and it wants all the power it can get. It attracts, our founders understood, the people who will be attracted to government are ambitious people, and that's why we put all the checks and balances in the system to make sure that if you want more power, you would have to try to take it from me, and I'm going to prevent you from doing it. But all governments see the wonderful idea of having all that power, and so that, as far as I know, they're all on fiat money standards instead of precious metal standards. But our Constitution actually forbids this from happening in two places. Article 1, Section 10 says, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin tender in payment of debt. And if you remember, originally we had a balance of power between the federal government and states. And so the states would make sure the federal government didn't get out of hand. Of course, we wiped that out with the 17th Amendment by making popular election of the Senate instead of the state houses electing the Senate. And then also, Article 1, Section 8, Congress shall make, Congress shall coin money and regulate the value thereof. Now, the last time they regulated the value of $1, it was worth one ounce of 0.999 pure silver. Now, do you think for a Federal Reserve note dollar you can buy that? That is legally what a dollar is still, because they've never repealed that. Just everyone ignores it. Oh, mine.
I have a three-part question.
Okay.
What is the first step to repealing the act? And what can we do to do that? And what do you think the likelihood of accomplishing that is?
Okay. That's an excellent question. By the way, the difference between a good question and an excellent question, I know the answer to excellent. First step is call your representative and insist that they pass the next round of repeal of the Baseline Budget Act. There have been 17 attempts to date to repeal it, and they've all been blocked.
By whom?
Democrats, unfortunately. The one time that Republicans had both the House and the Senate, Bill Clinton was president, and he vetoed the act. So we need the 18th one to pass. It just has to. So call your representative, insist that they do it, and vote for someone who will if they won't. That's step one. Stop the automatic growth. Then step two, we have to go through all these other things that are heinous to our own personal freedoms. Every power the government has, they took from people. Power doesn't come from trees or rocks. It comes from people. By denying us our liberties and taking it upon themselves to make things happen or decisions for us is where they get their power. So we need to return to our own freedoms. Right now, this huge debt, we can't pay it. My granddaughter, Jade, and my grandson, Connor, are stuck with our debts. Any other questions? Oh, did I answer all three?
The likelihood?
I don't know. We need to get representatives who want to stop this from happening elected to a majority. And that may mean a 60 out of 100 majority in the Senate. We're not going to get there in this cycle. I'm not even sure now after Todd Aiken that we're going to have a 51-seat majority in the Senate. So I don't know if it'll ever be done. But it has to be, because we're losing our country. Jim?
And it's too big to fail. Could a president not bail? Well, we had the big bailout of the banks. Would either of the presidents at the time?
It's law. For the banking industry, it's law. We have to bail out the big banks. That's part of the Federal Reserve Act.
So the president couldn't stop.
General Motors, something like that, yeah, could have been stopped, but not the banks. They had to be done. John,
I was gonna ask.
last question.
Okay, do you think that by getting this thing stopped, that it would take money out of politics?
No, politics is still about power. And we will always have ambitious people seeking that power. So I do believe we have to repeal the 17th Amendment, give power in one house of Congress back to the states, where the legislature appoints the senators and the electoral college, rather than the mass people. So the states will then have skin in the game again and want to balance out the power of the federal government. Whether or not that'll happen is also a long shot. We are out of time. Thank you very much.